And welcome in the first instance, Cam. Well, Cam, you've had a very, very busy year, very busy 18 months as a Nuffield Scholar, and a year which includes also a new addition to your family, a baby daughter, most recently. So congratulations to you and your partner.
Thank you.
But let's start today's presentation with a simple question. Your report title uses the word farming energy. What is farming energy, and why does it interest you?
Thanks, Mary, and hello everybody tuning in. So, what is farming energy? Well, I guess much like dairy farming is about generating a dairy product, beef farming about generating a beef product to sell. Energy farming is about generating a form of energy on farm, and that could be electricity, a liquid fuel, a gas, or anything that can be used to power something else. But importantly, it has to have a lower climate impact than the fossil fuel that it's replacing. So, I guess most energy farming discussions that we've had in this country focuses on generating energy on farm that can be used somewhere else on that farm. But what I wanted to look at was something on a much grander scale by exporting energy off farm for financial gain. Why does this interest me? A couple of reasons. Firstly, I guess in a way, I'm an energy farmer already. We're in partnership with Care Energy, who have installed 50 kilowatts of solar just behind our dairy shed. The solar farm generates enough power to run our dairy shed, and the excess power gets exported to the grid. So, when you do the maths on what we've got here, it's actually the most profitable land use on a per hectare basis on our farm. Secondly, second reason, really since the end of the dairy boom, pastoral agriculture really hasn't had too many new avenues for growth other than fine tuning what we already do. So I wanted to look at new opportunities that would hopefully open a few new doors. And thirdly, and perhaps probably most front of mind for me personally, is the push for net zero carbon by 2050 in New Zealand, and how farming energy could be one of the solutions for many sectors, actually, not just for agriculture.
So picking up on that last point, that it is perhaps front of mind was the Net Zero 2050 Act. Can you give us some further expansion on why you see farming energy as a solution for this, for us?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So the net zero carbon legislation in New Zealand, and I guess for those international people that are tuning in, the legislation aims to bring New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions down to essentially net zero by 2050, effectively having no further global warming impact. It's not too dissimilar to what goals that other countries have at the moment. So in New Zealand, our greenhouse gas emissions, gross emissions, look a little bit like this. So Lisa, can we just show the first slide there, the first pie graph on those slides? So the first pie graph, it just showed the breakdown, I guess, of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture, for those of us in New Zealand, has responsibility for about 48% of those gross emissions. But in a very close second place is the energy sector on about 41%. Now, I guess I'd quite like to focus in on that breakdown for a little bit, because I've got a bit of a plea to the ag leaders that are hopefully tuned into this call. That pie graph with agriculture and energy has dictated the greenhouse gas debate in New Zealand for quite a while now, and it places agriculture at 48% firmly in the spotlight as the biggest emitter, requiring the greatest reductions to meet net zero targets. But to anyone who understands agricultural emissions in this country, it's simply not the case. Methane is a short-lived gas that makes up the lion's share of New Zealand's agricultural emissions. And due to its short-lived nature, really methane emissions only need to stabilise long-term to reach net zero carbon. So, even the Act itself, the Net Zero Carbon Act, recognises this. So we need to stop talking about gross emissions like this graph, because it's very misleading in the conversation, and start talking about emissions which add to future global warming. And the best way to do that, I believe, is visually. So I had to go at redrawing this graph. So if we can go into that second, thanks for sorting that, Lisa, the second graph there. Yep. I've had to go at this to show one possible way of visualizing the true emissions that need to be mitigated in this country. And I've called it future global warming emissions. Now this shows all the emissions that need to be mitigated to reach net zero carbon and the sectors that are responsible for them. So as you can see, ag is only responsible for 27% of these emissions, and energy is responsible for 57%. And this, doing this visually really shines a light firmly on the sector that needs the most attention to address emissions. And it's not about trying to pass the buck, pass the blame, because the ag sector uses a lot of energy too. But from what I've seen overseas, where energy is nearly always the biggest emitter, the focus on energy has seen more planning, more action, more R&D, more technology for that sector than what we've seen here in New Zealand. So, my plea is to those that are listening is that we really need to change the conversation on greenhouse gas emissions in New Zealand to show the country the true picture of the challenge that's ahead of us.
But we have a lot of renewable power here in New Zealand. So what is the emissions issue within the energy sector?
Yeah, that's true, and it's probably what a lot of people in New Zealand think around our renewable energy sector, that we have a lot of renewable hydro, geothermal, even a little bit of wind electricity generation, but energy is much more than just electricity. It's oil, it's petrol, diesel, natural gas, coal, even the wood that you burn in your fireplace. So this is where actually just the next slide there, please, Lisa, if you can. This is the last pie graph. So this is where New Zealand gets its energy from. And you can see there's a red outline on a big chunk of that pie there that shows how much of our energy comes from fossil fuels. It's currently 60% of all our energy. So, the energy sector itself is a long way to go before it's clean and green.
So coming back to farming energy as a solution, can you tell us where did you travel and what did you see during your time away and time as a Nuffield Scholar?
Yeah, a lot. You cover a lot of ground during a Nuffield year, and really I was looking at anything and everything ag related, and I could quite easily fill an hour on that. But I guess just to probably pick up on some of the highlights relating to farming energy. All of the scholars from 2019 spent traveling in Iowa, learning about American ag in the age of Donald Trump. Really insightful week. And probably some of the key learnings for me is that Iowa as a state sits in the middle of the corn belt. They're a huge corn producer. Yeah. They're also the largest producer of bioethanol in the US. So bioethanol is a liquid fuel. It's fermented in the US. And federal law over there requires that all gasoline has to have a minimum of 10% ethanol, bioethanol in it, which really drives demand for the product. Now, the corn growers benefit from having a higher demand for their product, and emissions from transport fuel over there is reduced, if only slightly. And I guess internationally, there's lots of different fuels that are being used for biofuel. I saw sugar cane in Brazil, sugar beet. Some new technology in California that originated here in New Zealand, actually, that is looking to turn tree trimmings from almond trees into fuel. So, what might this look like in New Zealand? We grow a lot of corn or maize here very successfully. Fodder beet is a very high yielding crop that I grow myself. It's a form of sugar beet that could be used for biofuel. In horticulture, it could be wine or fruit trimmings. It could be tree trimmings from forestry, the slash. You might even have other dedicated high-yielding crops that could be grown for biofuel. So, and one of the key upsides of biofuel is that we don't need to convert our vehicle fleet to some other new technology, as you would with electric cars. Most of our cars can already take a very high percentage of biofuel.
Sorry, Cam, a few glitches there. So leaving aside the upsides, what are the downsides?
Yeah, with biofuel. So the big downside, as probably everyone's thinking, is the economics of it. the oil price, particularly at the moment, is very, very low. And so biofuel really struggles to compete in the open market with fossil fuels. And so what ends up, I guess, the whole industry is the industry is really reliant on
gradually wash out, but you've got long take pine trees.
is a pretty big downside.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure that's something that would make farmers pretty nervous.
Yeah, especially the American farmers caught up with that issue overseas at the moment. It is a big hurdle to overcome, and to be honest, I don't have a solution for that at the moment, but I believe that with the right policy in place, you could make headway.
So I'll ask the question again. What other farming energy options?
So yeah, in the Netherlands, nearly every farm I saw a wind turbine. I also came across a lot of them in Ireland and California, and in most cases, the farmers I talked to were getting paid a lease rate from the company to place a turbine on their land. And probably a little bit like my scenario with the solar panels, on a per hectare rate, it's actually very profitable. The downside is then you have to look at them. Personally, I don't mind them, but they're not to everybody's liking. And New Zealand wind turbines are actually not that uncommon. We have a farm up the road here in North Canterbury that's about to begin leasing land for wind turbines. And while they might not be an option for every farm in strategic locations, they could prove pretty profitable. The solar farming is probably the other big one. It's pretty widespread in some of these countries. The solar farmers over there on farms are much larger than what you'd see here in New Zealand. In California, I visited a dairy farm that had about 1 megawatt of solar panels on their farm. That's about enough power to power 500 homes. Now, he'd received a grant from a state fund that all the power users over there need to pay into, and that helped cover part of the cost. And California also has a policy, what they call net metering on solar over there. So I guess just to explain how that works, in New Zealand, when you generate a kilowatt of power and export it to the national grid, rather than, because you don't need to use it yourself, you only get paid the wholesale rate for that power, which is about 7 cents. But that compares to the retail rate that you buy power for, and that's about 22 cents. So in New Zealand, it really only pays to install solar to a scale that you'll use most of the power yourself. Now, with net metering in California, you can offset the power you export to the grid with the power you buy from the grid. So essentially, you get the retail price for the power up to a certain limit for exporting power to the grid. And it really makes a massive difference to the economics of energy farming using solar. So the farmers are, I guess, economically incentivized to build much bigger solar farms. And I really don't see why similar policies couldn't work here, again, within certain limits. And actually just thinking, there was another technology, solar technology, that I saw at the University of Arizona called agrovoltaics. The students there were growing horticultural crops under solar panels. And what the solar panels did was create kind of a regulated microclimate, which actually boosted the yields of the crops and required less irrigation. So some really cool stuff, really cool technology.
So that sounds really fascinating. I get the feeling that there's quite a lot of evolving technology happening worldwide.
Yeah, there is. And I guess a good example is probably, you look at the hype that's built up around electric cars in the last few years, and then in probably the last year or two, that hydrogen cars and fuel cells are gaining a lot of popularity. So there is a lot of evolution in that technology. One of the technologies I learned a lot about was to do with biodigesters. And biodigesters are typically tanks that take an organic matter and use bacteria to break down that organic matter into a gas called biogas. They're a little bit like an enclosed effluent pond, I guess. The biogas is about 50% methane, and you can either burn that gas to create heat or electricity, or the latest tech I saw was to separate that methane out from the biogas, and you can pump it straight into the natural gas network. Or you could fill up your barbecue gas bottle. Actually, in Germany, New Holland have just released a tractor that runs on straight methane. So over there, they can use their biodigesters like a fuel tank to run the machinery on farms. So some really neat technology. Actually, biodigesters, they're gaining a lot of popularity in Europe, and they work really well with the dairy units over there, where the cows are housed year-round, and large volumes of effluent can be collected and used as the feedstock. But the key difference, I guess, over there is that the effluent is quite consistent, and consistency is quite an important factor for a biodigester. So when you look at applying them to a New Zealand system, where we have a lot of variable amounts of rainfall in our effluent ponds, it may or may not work so well. But like biofuel, you can use other products as well, organic products, tree trimmings, waste baleage, grass clippings, energy crops. It's actually, I remember seeing a slide on the statistics of the amount of energy in a straw bale. So under the right conditions, it may be more profitable to turn your straw into an energy source than to feed it to a cow. And just one last piece of tech I wanted to talk about is carbon capture and storage. So carbon capture, this is where a carbon source is captured and converted into a stable form and then stored for a long period of time. It's a carbon negative process, and from all the reports I read on the future of energy, this is a really key part of reaching climate change targets. So some of the examples I saw were where carbon dioxide was being captured from a power plant and pumped into underground gas fields or turned into graphite for manufacturing. Someone was even having a go at creating artificial diamonds from it. But I guess from an agricultural perspective, carbon capture and storage is probably going to take the form of something like biochar. So biochar is a coal-like substance that you get from heating organic matter in the absence of oxygen. And it's a really stable form of carbon that, when ground up and added to soils, it can improve the water holding capacity and the nutrient holding capacity. So, on a commercial scale, I think it'd be awesome if farmers could get paid to be storing this industrial carbon in a form that actually improves the health of our soils.
So now that you're at home and you've had time to reflect, is there anything that you would like to implement on farm in terms of farming energy?
Lots of ideas, but I guess to put a plan together, it's actually quite difficult. Now, it's a good question, and I'm not actually sure what the first steps would be. That there's a lot of people probably on this call thinking along the same lines as me, that this is all really nice technology, but it's quite complex, and it really is. The thought of learning enough about any of these technologies, then investing significant capital in a wind turbine or a solar farm or a biodigester, generating the energy, marketing it, finding someone who wants to buy it, it's all pretty risky. So now, I guess from my perspective, I see the opportunities to develop energy farming starting small, by bringing some of the right experience and skills together to what I've called, or to form what I've called a farming energy working group. Now, this group could look at all the technology options available, the economics, the politics, the policy here in New Zealand, the climate, and develop some energy farming systems that, in a way, not too dissimilar to the way Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb work for developing farming systems for their sectors. So it's actually surprising that the more I've talked about this in various forms of media, the more I've had people contact me with various interests in the energy sector. So we actually have a lot of this expert knowledge on these technologies here in New Zealand, but from what I've heard, there seems to be just a lack of motivational or perhaps coordination in turning these ideas into systems and commercial reality. The other part that I guess I saw overseas and people have highlighted here in New Zealand is the need for supporting policy, because a lot of these energy farming systems just aren't likely to compete directly with fossil fuels on an economic basis. So I see this working group advocating for some of those policy changes as well. And actually, on the policy front, the New Zealand government's actually in the middle of creating an energy strategy at the moment to help meet net zero targets. But the only primary industry group that's at the table at the moment is forestry. So, if we want to make the most of this opportunity, the timing is, I think timing's pretty good right now. And probably the last component of that, I guess, in terms of planning where this might go, is an opportunity for farmers to work together in true cooperative spirit to help manage and market the forms of energy, much like we do for our meat and milk products. And that could take the form of marketing it or selling the energy amongst themselves first, and then to the wider public beyond that. So there's a few examples of this happening internationally already. And I think a farmer's green energy co-op has a really nice ring to it.
Indeed. So, but it sounds a bit like building a whole new energy industry from scratch.
Yeah, it sounds like a big task, doesn't it? I mean, it is and it isn't. In a way, the components are all there, and I think the motivation is there. And so, while they do seem like big, ambitious steps, I think if you think in the grand scheme of things, if New Zealand is really serious about getting to net zero carbon, we really need to plan for a world where there's no more oil, no more natural gas, no more coal. And I think that the technology or the components of these systems could really be a big part of helping New Zealand reach that target.
Well, thank you, Cam. We've got quite a few questions have popped up, so perhaps we'll go straight into those.
Sure.
The first one is from Ben Smith, and he's asking, how much time did you spend in California, and did you see the new RNG program?
I spent about a week in California, mostly around the San Francisco area, talking to some of the tech startups and dairy farmers that are not too far from there. The RNG project, I might need a bit more detail on what that's referring to. California being California and San Francisco being what it is, there is a host of technology coming out of that place. I was at a conference there on my way home late last year, and really what I've talked about is almost archaic technology compared to some of the options that they're coming up with, particularly in that biospace. And granted, it is using a lot of genetic engineering, so that's another question that might need to be answered at some point. But yeah, it's a really evolving space, and if there's something that New Zealand wants to be good at, or perhaps be a proving ground for, then some of this new technology could suit us really well.
Okay. Ben's actually just let us know RNG stands for Regenerated Natural Gas, CNG in New Zealand. I don't know if that...
Yeah, it's probably not too dissimilar to the comments I was making around the biogas and refining the methane out of that. I believe that's what he's talking about. So there's a lot of the the green technology over there is looking at converting power generation from burning coal into renewable gas. And so the US has got a very strong push for finding other sources of renewable natural gas, as they see that as being a cleaner, greener option as coal. Now that might be, we probably see things a little bit differently because you're still essentially burning a fossil fuel. But as I said, like there's new technology going on here, including the carbon capture and storage technology that can suck the carbon out of those emissions, store it permanently. And so you can arguably create a renewable energy source, a low impact coal burning or natural gas burning plant using some of this technology.
Next question from Alice Riley. Is there any reason that solar panels can't or aren't going on the roof of factories, etc., in built up areas where the energy demand is highest rather than on productive land?
Yep, good point. Yep, so the solar technology, there again, all technology is developing very, very quickly. The efficiency of it is growing rapidly. In fact, on our solar panels, when we had them installed, they came out in 2 shipments. They were 3 months apart, and the difference in that 3 months, actually the second shipment was 10% more efficient than the first shipment. So that's how quickly some of this technology is developing. So I guess in terms of placement, yep, you're right that it's probably best to place them on blocks of land that aren't going to be productive in a way, and that's what we've done. So on our farm, the land we're using for the solar panels is a little scrubby area that's not irrigated, that really doesn't fit into any of our other paddocks. It was just sitting there. So for us, it was considered an unproductive block of land, which is probably what I'd promote if farmers were looking at it. If you were putting them on buildings, the one challenge with buildings is that the efficiency of the solar panels is heavily reliant on their orientation to the sun during the day. And so there's probably some building designs where it would work quite well, where the building can use that energy themselves. But for the likes of even our dairy shed, the orientation means that really the solar panels wouldn't capture sun for half the day. and that really does degrade the economics of the whole case study, really.
Well, thank you, Cam. First is from Solus Norton, and I think it really is for both Cameron and Hamish. What are the bits that scare you most about what you studied and what the topics that you chose? Perhaps, Cam, do you want to answer first?
What scared me most? Probably from my probably two answers to that. So the first one from my topic is just around the energy sector in general, that people don't really, I don't think our country or anyone internationally has really grasped the changes that are required to meet these climate change targets. It's really easy to put a target in place and say, right, we're going to be net zero 2050 or pest-free 2050 or smoke-free 2021 or whatever it is. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is putting a plan in place and tracking it and actually achieving that. And while I was in Europe, there were, so the EU's had targets for a lot of their countries for a while now, and they are just busting their targets year after year after year. No one's achieving their target, or very few achieving their targets over there, because there's no planning in place and people actually don't want to change. So the scary part for me is that people think, oh, it's great, we've got a target, we'll put it down the track, and we'll find a way of getting there. It'll happen naturally. This stuff doesn't happen naturally. You need a plan to make it change. And just on the second answer to that, if I can, is around, probably relating to Hamish's topic, the divide between I guess what the farmers understand and the science, or the scientific debate versus that public debate, that actual science versus social science, and we call it the rural-urban divide, but it pops up everywhere that we went, and it's that same challenge of how do you bring that back together again? How do you educate people to help them come to the conclusion of what's actually going to make a difference, not just what seems to make a difference or what might make them feel better, but what's actually going to help them achieve those goals. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
Do you think food should be, or even can be, produced at net zero?
Yeah, so net zero is probably, it's an interesting concept in itself, in that there's probably a lot of people you ask about it and say, look, net zero is when we're not emitting anything anymore. And the reality is, I don't think human civilization could exist if we stopped emitting absolutely everything. The big part of net zero is being able to offset. And so I would say that it is going to be possible, but it's going to include that offsetting, which, talking about the technology side of things and that carbon capture and storage, as I said, absolutely every energy forecast I read from national, European, International Energy Agency all talked about the requirement to be able to sequester carbon and store it for long periods of time, because no country in the world is going to be able to get to net zero based on emissions alone. There needs to be offsetting. And so that's where a lot of what I saw technology and investment in California was going into, because while it's, the interesting part is that it's not a productive technology. You're not actually making something to sell to somebody. You are providing a service in a way to the world. And unfortunately, the economics for that, given the legislation internationally, and even in New Zealand, the carbon price is too low to really drive a lot of that technology. So it's sitting there in the wings and people are working on it, but yeah, the economics for it just isn't a big driver yet.
Okay, thank you, Cam. Just we've had some comment back from Ben Smith, and Cam, you might be interested in this, that we have a specialist, and Ben's saying that we have a specialist team based in New Zealand able to support this right now through the Bioenergy Association. Are you aware of that? Have you got any comment around that?
Yes, yep, thanks, Ben. So there's quite a few people that are working on various forms of this technology. So the Bioenergy Association has been pushing this for a while. You might remember 10 years ago, we actually had a biofuel standard here in New Zealand under the previous Labour government that then got turfed out when the GFC hit. So a lot of this isn't new technology to New Zealand. We've got people that are passionate about it. I've just been contacted by the Biochar Association of New Zealand. I've had a catch up with 2 guys that are looking at importing biodigesters from Europe. So these people are out there. They've got the technical knowledge. The guy I work with the solar panels, he comes from the energy industry. So it's not as if we need to generate a lot of this knowledge ourselves. There are other people in New Zealand to do it, but it's that coordination, and a lot of it sort of operating in the fringes at the moment because there hasn't been that motivational coordination, and that's probably where I guess the steps that I was talking about, given the scale of what it could mean for agriculture, could be that driver to bring these pieces together and build something that's commercial and probably a bit more in the spotlight.
So another question for you, Cam. You highlighted an interesting opportunity for energy farming. What are your thoughts on biogenic GHG emissions reductions? How do you identify what farm management options work best for you on your own farm? So 2 questions there. First of all, what are your thoughts on biogenic emission reductions? So
biogenic, I'm probably not too familiar with that term. Are they talking about biological emissions? Perhaps, what was the second part of that question? Perhaps I can clarify the first part. The second part was, how do you identify what farm management options work best for your own farm? Yeah, that's an industry-wide challenge that I know all the industry groups are working furiously away at. It's like probably the big debate that we've had in the last 10 years around nitrates, that you're not going to end up with a list that you can implement every one of those things on that list on your farm. It's going to be horses for courses, but it takes, I guess, an understanding of the intrinsic components of each of those systems. So, like I said, with the wind turbines, we've got a particularly windy valley up here in North Canterbury where this farm is putting the wind turbines in. That works well for them. The company that owns the solar panels on our farm is building the New Zealand's largest solar farm up in Marlborough, 2 megawatts. And that works well for them because of their sunshine hours. So yeah, it's all going to depend on the resources that you have on farm, what you can grow, what the weather's like. And that's exactly what we saw internationally. It all changed depending on where you were and what you had to work with.
Good. Next question for Cam. Wondering if you have considered the emissions that go into producing a steel for wind turbines. And then the comment, a questioner asked, I expect that after a number of years, the benefits would have offset the initial emissions associated with producing steel. Your comments?
Yep, that's true. So actually, it's an interesting one, and I hope I don't go into too much detail here, but if you think about a solar panel or a wind turbine, they don't actually sequester carbon at all during their lifetime. They just prevent use of burning of fuel somewhere else. So actually, if you take their production, and same with electric cars, if you take their production into account, they are a net emitter of greenhouse gases over their entire lifetime. What the benefit could be is that they prevent further emissions from the other fuel source that it's being used to replace. So that's probably a good example where even if we powered the entire world with solar panels and wind turbines, you're still going to have a net emission going on. That's where you need this carbon capture type technology on the other side of it to offset even these small emissions that you might be having. And that's all part of, I guess, those pieces when you say a net emissions is about a net zero, not gross zero emissions.
And Solus Norton has come back with a comment that this is a field of science in its own right, known as energy return on investment. Is there an issue around marketing within agriculture? Perhaps, Cam, you might like to mention that as well.
Yeah, it's funny. We had a bit of a chat about marketing last week, and it's something that in general we're probably not very good at the industry, either accepting it or creating it to try and get our message across. So yeah, I'm no expert on that. I don't really have any answers there, but perhaps it's another one of those fields that we need to get a lot better at very quickly.
In a highly urbanised country like New Zealand, should we not move this discussion from industry to include household level impact?
Yeah, I guess you've got to be careful with that too. I mean, I guess if you were to take glyphosate, for instance, and say, well, what does this mean day to day? If we didn't have glyphosate, what would it mean for your product prices, your supermarket prices? If we didn't have a alternative energy source, what could this mean if carbon price hits $200-300 a tonne and suddenly you're paying that tax because of the fuel you're using? I mean, I think there's probably benefits in that, but you don't want to, I feel, scare the consumer or make us feel as though they're being bullied into a certain decision. That you don't want to sort of chase them with a stick and say, you've got to trust us or else, that you get them to believe in what we're trying to do, and that actually the science backs it, and there's a reason why we're doing what we're doing, rather than sort of scare them. So I think there's probably a positive way of talking about it. I'm not too sure what that is, but yeah, I think we'd probably want to stay away from trying to scare the consumer to say, you know, do this or let us do this or else.
Cam, you mentioned just then the carbon price. Questions come, how much would the carbon price need to change to make a difference to energy production numbers?
Probably simply quite a lot. Yeah, the economics are quite heavily swayed against biofuels, and you probably would have seen the oil price dropping to, you know, $25 a barrel recently, and it's just cleaning out the biofuel industry over in the US, because even with all their subsidies and their policies, they really can't support it. So yeah, the carbon price would have to be quite a lot higher. I think the forecast in New Zealand, at least north of $200 a tonne. I think it's probably more, there's probably two parts to that. One is making the various farming energy options economic, so that is part of it. But the second part is probably how much or how high does it need to be to sway people's decisions? And this probably comes back to the science versus the social science again, that, you know, would people prefer to be paying, you know, a $200 a tonne carbon charge, and while it might make bioethanol economic, that people just don't want to change. You know, they like the convenience, they like the car they've got, they're not going to change it anyway, they're happy to pay a slightly higher cost. So there's probably, yeah, two components to that. And then the other part of it is the longevity of that value as well, that if you had a carbon price that bounced around like the milk price used to and the beef price has been doing, it's pretty hard to build a business on that too. So probably price and stability would be key components there.
Good answer. So a question from Don McFarlane, one of the other Mackenzie Charitable Foundation trustees. Is the use of wood chip as a biofuel increasing, and does it have a greater role in future in New Zealand?
Yes, potentially. So at the moment, the very basic technology is you can burn it, but that is very basic. The technology that I was talking about over in California, where they're turning almond trees into biofuels, is what they call cellulosic biofuel, which the forestry sector is researching. Scion, the CRI Scion in New Zealand, is researching a lot of at the moment. So that's turning any sort of fibrous source into an energy form. So that technology is probably just on the cusp of becoming commercial, and there again is probably reliant a little bit on the carbon price, making it, just tipping it over the edge to becoming a commercial reality. So in New Zealand, given the size of our forestry sector, I see there is huge potential for that, and many energy forms, not just biofuel, but in carbon capture and biochar and all those other opportunities. So it's very close.
Well done to you both. Thank you for answering the questions that have arrived, and thank you to the people who've asked the questions. And now it's my pleasure to hand back to Chris.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Hamish and Cameron for your insightful comments. If you've got any further questions that you would like to raise as a result of both Hamish and Cameron's presentations, you're very welcome to forward them to the Rural Leaders team in our email there at programs@ruralleaders.co.nz. Again, can I thank all of our strategic partners, in particular Mackenzie Charitable Foundation, for facilitating today's webinar. Again, finally thanking Cam and Hamish for their insightful and thought-provoking presentations. If you want to read their full reports, they are posted on the New Zealand Rural Leaders website. And finally, kia ora tātou, ka kite anō. Thank you all, and we'll see you again at 11:30 on the 2nd of June. Ka kite.